Prudence Ainsworth wore her mourning grey to her own father's will reading, and they handed her a chair by the door, not the table, the door, as though she were staff, as though the woman who had nursed the old man for 3 years were a maid who had wandered in from the hall. She did not flush. She did not argue. She only folded her gloved hands in her lap and watched the ink on the pages the men were passing between them. Then her brother's hired barrister saw her lips moving. She was reading the Latin along the top of a document, quietly, the way a person reads a hymn they already know. And he laughed. A QC in a good coat, laughing at a woman in grey. The lady, he said, mistakes a parlour for a lending library, and 11 people in that room laughed with him. 11, her sister, her brother, the solicitor, the clerk. All of them laughing, she let them. She waited until the laughter thinned. And then she asked one question, just one. She asked about a date, a single date, on a single page, the page that gave everything to her brother. She asked it softly, without heat, and the whole room went still. Nobody there understood why, nobody but her. And I'm going to stop right there, before the answer, because you need to understand who this woman was before you understand what she did. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, if a quiet person in your own life was ever underestimated, subscribe, because this channel tells their stories. And do me a small kindness. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back 3 weeks, to a study and a dying man and the daughter nobody thought to look at twice. Ashcroft Hall stood a mile outside Nettlebridge, in Somerset, and it had stood there a long time. Grey stone, ivy on the north wall. A gravel drive that curved past the old oak the tenants called the Judge, because Josiah Ainsworth used to sit under it in summer and settle their small quarrels for free. That was the spring of 1873. And Josiah Ainsworth was the man in the study upstairs, and he was going blind, and he was dying, and only one of his 3 children ever came to sit with him. He had been a Queen's Counsel. A good one. He had argued at the assizes for 40 years and kept the respect of men who agreed with him and men who did not. He had a face like a kind hawk and a voice that could fill a courtroom or gentle a frightened tenant, whichever the moment asked. And when his eyes began to fail him, when the print of his beloved reports blurred to grey, he did not weep about it. He asked for a reader. His son Gerald did not come. Gerald was in London, or in Bath, or at a table somewhere with cards in his hand and other men's money going out of his pockets. His daughter Cordelia did not come either. Cordelia had married a vane and a townhouse and considered Somerset a place one recovered from. That left Prudence. The middle one. The plain one. The one who had never been asked to a single ball twice because she had a wide, quiet face and green eyes that looked at you a beat too long, as if she were reading you and finding the passage dull. So Prudence came. Every evening. She would climb the stairs after the accounts were done, and she would light the good lamp, and she would sit in the low chair by her father's knee, and she would read to him. And here is the thing that nobody in that family bothered to notice. She did not read him novels. She did not read him the newspaper. She read him Blackstone. She read him Chitty on contracts. She read him the law reports, the fresh ones that came down from London bound in paper, and the old ones bound in calf that smelled of his whole life. She read him the cases, and she was good at it, because after the first year she stopped only reading, and she started reading with him. He would say, "Stop there, girl. What did that judge just do wrong?" And at first she would not know. And then, after a while, she would know. She would say, "He decided the thing he wasn't asked to decide, father." And the old hawk would smile in the lamplight with his ruined eyes and say, "Yes, that's exactly what he did." And they would go on. 3 years of evenings. Do you understand what that is? That is more law than most young men swallow in their whole apprenticeship at the bar. She did not know it counted for anything. She thought she was only keeping her father company. But something was being built in her, page by page, evening by evening, the way water builds a stone. He used to say a thing about her, once or twice, to the few old friends who still came out from town. He'd say Prudence had the only real lawyer's mind he had ever made himself, better than any pupil he'd taken, sharper than half the juniors down at Lincoln's Inn. But he only said it quietly, and he only said it once or twice, because you did not say such things aloud in 1873. Women did not go to the bar. Women did not read law. It would have been like praising a horse for its handwriting, a charming impossibility. Best not mentioned. And Prudence, for her part, kept his things close in a way nobody remarked upon. She kept his monogrammed brief bag, the worn leather one with J.A. stamped in gold gone dull, and she hung it on the hook by the study desk where it had always hung. She kept his law books, the whole wall of them, and she did not sell a single volume. And the maid, a plain, sensible girl named Alice, said once to the cook, not meaning anything by it, that Miss Prudence still marked the margins the way the old master used to. Little pencil notes down the side of the page. Little arrows, the same neat hand. Nobody thought about that. You should. Hold on to it. Because on the night her father died, he was not holding a pen. I want you to remember that. By March, Josiah Ainsworth could not hold a spoon. The arthritis had locked his fingers into a claw he was ashamed of, and Prudence fed him his broth herself, and she never once let him see her mind it. His hand shook so badly he could not sign his own name. She knew that. She had watched it happen. She had watched the great courtroom hand shrink to a tremble. That fact was living inside her, quiet, like a stone in a pocket, waiting. He died on the 17th of March, near midnight, with his daughter's hand under his and the lamp still lit, and for 3 weeks after, the house was full of a strange, thin calm. The tenants came, hat in hand, to say what he had meant to them. Prudence knew every one of their names. She knew whose roof leaked and whose boy had the fever, and who was 3 months behind and terrified of the bailiff. Her father had never turned a struggling family out in 40 years, and she meant to keep it that way, because she believed in the quiet certain centre of herself that this was what he had wanted the estate to be for. And then Gerald came home, and the calm ended. Gerald Ainsworth was 38, and handsome in the way that goes soft at the edges, and he was drowning. That was the part he hid best. He owed the Nettlebridge and County Bank £6,000. 6,000 gambling debts dressed up as a gentleman's temporary difficulty, and behind them a foreclosure notice with a date on it, ticking. He needed the estate. He needed all of it, whole and fast, and in his own name, or the bank would have him. The hall was valued at £42,000 with the tenant farms. To a man that far under, £42,000 was air, and he was suffocating. Cordelia came down from London too, in her good black, wanting the townhouse, and, more than the townhouse, wanting the look of the thing. She wanted to win. She had spent her whole life certain that her plain sister was slow, and she mistook Prudence's silence for stupidity the way she mistook a locked room for an empty one. Now, the old family solicitor was a man named Silas Pruitt, of the firm Pruitt and Marchbank in Nettlebridge. Neat little man. Neat little practice. And Mr. Pruitt understood which way the money in this family now flowed, and he understood that a grateful Gerald with a whole estate was worth a great deal more to him than a dead client's true wishes. So when a certain document was needed, Mr. Pruitt was the man who produced it. It arrived at the family supper like a snake set gently on the tablecloth. A codicil. A late change to the will, Pruitt explained, dabbing his mouth. A codicil dated the 14th of March, 3 days before Josiah died. And this codicil, this convenient afterthought, left the hall and the whole residue of the estate to Gerald. It left the London house to Cordelia, and to Prudence, to the daughter who had read to him every night for 3 years, it left, and I will quote it, because the wording matters, an annuity, and the books of the study, that she may improve her reading. That she may improve her reading. They put that in writing. They looked at the woman who had read her father the entire common law of England, and they left her his books so that she might improve, and they thought it a fine, kind, condescending little joke. Prudence read the codicil in silence at the supper table. She read it twice. And then she set it down, and she smoothed the paper flat with 2 fingers, and she said something very mild. She said, "On the 14th of March, Father could not hold a spoon. I fed him myself. He could not have held a pen." The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. And then Gerald laughed, too loud, and said, "Good God, Prue, are you a physician now?" And Cordelia said, "Don't be tiresome, Prudence. Nobody wants your opinion." And Pruitt smiled his neat little smile and said the codicil was witnessed and in order, and that grief made people fanciful, and perhaps Miss Prudence should rest. So she said nothing more. She folded her hands. But she had said the date out loud, in front of all of them, and I want you to file it away exactly as she did. The 14th of March. A man who could not hold a pen. Remember it. It's going to come back and take the roof off this house. The reading of the will was set for the following week, in the front parlour of the hall. It was a large room done in dark red, with heavy furniture and a long mahogany table, and on the day it was full. 11 people. I counted them for you at the start, and I'll count them again, because the number is the whole point. Gerald was there, at the table. Cordelia was there, at the table, with her husband Mr. Vane beside her. Pruitt was there, papers squared before him. There was a clerk, and there were the 2 required witnesses to the codicil, sitting stiff and paid. There was the family's physician. There was a neighbour or 2 brought in for the look of respectability. And there was one more man at the far end whom Gerald had brought down from London at real expense, and whose name was Mr. Hollis. Mr. Hollis was a QC, a hired barrister, a big, easy, well-fed man who had built a career on the pleasant certainty that he was the cleverest person in any room he entered. Gerald had brought him to make sure the reading went smoothly, to overthrow any objection with the sheer weight of a silk gown and a London reputation. Hollis expected an easy afternoon. He expected to be paid a great deal of money to do almost nothing, and he settled into his chair like a man who has ordered a good lunch. And Prudence came in last in her mourning grey, and there was no chair for her at the table. Every place was taken, so Pruitt, without looking up, waved a hand toward a single hard chair set against the wall, by the door, and she went and sat in it. By the door, apart from her own family. In the house she had run for 3 years, in the room where her father had settled other people's troubles, she was seated like a servant waiting to be called. She did not make a scene. Understand that about her. She simply crossed to the chair and sat and folded her gloved hands in her lap and looked at the table with those steady green eyes. Hollis QC read the will aloud. The main will first, an older document, all in order. And then he came to the codicil, the 14th of March, and he read that too, in his fine courtroom voice, rolling the phrases out, and when he reached the line about Prudence, the annuity, and the books, that she may improve her reading, 1 or 2 people at the table let a smile cross their faces, and glanced at the plain woman by the door to see how she took it. She took it without a flicker. But as Hollis read on into the Latin formalities at the foot of the page, the small legal recitations that close a document like that, her lips began, very slightly, to move. She was reading along. Silently, the way you'd hum under a song you've known all your life. She could not help it. 3 years at her father's knee had put that language in her mouth, and Hollis saw it. He stopped. He looked over the top of his page at this grey woman by the door mouthing his Latin, and a slow, delighted, contemptuous smile spread over his big face. And he said it. He said to the whole room, "The lady mistakes a parlour for a lending library." And the room laughed. All of them. Gerald barked it out, glad of the release. Cordelia tittered behind her glove. Pruitt allowed himself a dry chuckle. The clerk, the witnesses, the neighbours, the physician, 11 people in that dark red room, laughing at a woman for the crime of understanding what was being read about her own father. It went on a moment too long, the way cruel laughter does when people are relieved to be on the safe side of it. And Prudence stood up. She rose from the chair by the door, not fast, not trembling. She simply stood, and the laughter caught in the room's throat, and for one instant every face turned to her, uncertain, because a servant by the door was not supposed to stand. She opened her mouth to speak, and Cordelia reached over and patted the empty air where her sister's hand would have been if her sister had been close enough. A little performance of sisterly kindness for the watching neighbours, and said, in a sweet carrying voice, "Sit down, dear, this is men's work. Sit down, dear, this is men's work." And Prudence, I have to tell you the truth, because the truth is what makes the rest of it mean anything. Prudence sat down. She did. She lowered herself back onto that hard chair by the door, and she folded her hands again, and she said nothing. The moment passed. Hollis cleared his throat and read on. The estate went to Gerald, the house to Cordelia, the books to the plain sister, that she may improve her reading. And if you are feeling right now that something is wrong, that the wrong thing has just happened and no one is going to fix it, hold on to that feeling, because that is exactly the feeling she carried up the stairs that night. And that feeling is where the story turns. Now, I told you she asked one question in that room about a date, and I said I'd come back to it. She did not ask it during the laughing. She was too shaken then. Even a strong soul has a flaw, and hers had just been kicked out. She asked it near the very end, when the formal reading was done and the papers were being gathered, and it came out of her small and steady, almost to herself, but loud enough. She said, looking at the codicil in Pruitt's hands, "May I ask what day the 14th of March fell upon?" A strange question, a dull question, on its face. Pruitt frowned and said, humouring her, "A Friday, I believe." "Why?" And Prudence said, "No reason." "Thank you." And that was all, and the room, for reasons none of them could have named, went quiet for a beat before the chatter came back. Because some animal part of them heard something in the plainness of the question. A blade, wrapped in cloth. They didn't know yet. She did. "Keep the 14th of March in your hand. We are almost there." That night, the house emptied. The neighbours went home. Gerald and Hollis drank the good port and toasted a smooth afternoon. Cordelia wrote letters about her London house. And Prudence took the good lamp, the same lamp she had read by for 3 years, and she went into her father's study, and she shut the door, and she was alone with the wall of books and the brief bag on its hook. She did not weep. I think she wanted to. But she sat down at the desk instead, in his chair, and she pulled toward her the drawer where he had kept his private correspondence, and she found the last real letter he had ever written her. It was from early March, before the very end, but well into the ruin of his hands. He had insisted on writing it himself, refusing her help, a proud man's last stand, and it had cost him. And when she unfolded it now under the lamp, she saw again what she had seen when it arrived. The hand was barely a hand, the letters staggered. The pen had skated and dug and trailed off. Whole words dissolved into a tremble halfway through. It was the handwriting of a man whose fingers no longer obeyed him. It was heartbreaking. And it was proof. because beside that letter, in her memory, she set the codicil. The codicil dated the 14th of March, 3 days after this shaking scrawl. And on the codicil, at the foot, was her father's signature, Josiah Ainsworth, written firm and full, with the confident closing flourish he had used all his life, the long tail on the final letter that he had drawn 10,000 times in 10,000 courtrooms. A firm flourish. 3 days after this ruined, staggering hand, it was not possible. A man does not lose his signature and then, dying, get it back for 1 page. And now the years at his knee did their work, because she did not just feel that something was wrong. She knew in the exact language of the law why it was wrong, and she could hear his voice teaching it to her. Falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, he used to say, tapping the page. False in one thing, false in all. If a document lies about one particular, distrust the whole, and more than that, his own private rule, the thing he told her that the textbooks only circled around. He said, a forger always over-corrects a signature. A real man signs his name carelessly, from habit, and it comes out a little different every time. But a forger is afraid. A forger studies the true signature and copies it too well, too carefully, too perfectly. And that perfection is the tell. The flourish that is too clean is the flourish of a thief. She looked at the codicil's signature in her mind. Too clean, too firm, too perfect for a claw-handed dying man, over-corrected. There it was. And then she noticed the other thing, the thing that had been nagging at the edge of her all through the reading, the thing her eye had caught and her mind had filed. The ink. On a document that old, the ink should all be one age, one colour. Iron gall ink, the ink of law and record, goes brown as it oxidizes evenly across the whole page over weeks and months, and the body of that codicil was brown, properly, uniformly brown. But the date, the 14th of March, and the crucial clause, the one that heaped the estate onto Gerald, those lines had looked, to her too long-looking green eyes, just faintly, just wrongly, bluer, fresher, younger than the page they sat on. Someone had taken a real document, perhaps an old draft, perhaps a genuine paper her father had signed and left blank at the foot, and someone had added to it. Someone had written in the date and the fatal clause in fresh ink, on aged paper, and forged the confident signature of a man whose hand had already died before he did. She sat with that a long time, in the lamplight, in his chair, under the wall of his books, with his brief bag on the hook. And here is the part I most want you to hear, because this is who she was. She did not, in that moment, think, now I will prove how clever I am. She did not think of the laughter, or of Hollis's smile, or of Cordelia's men's work, and plot her revenge. She thought of the tenants. She thought of the boy with the fever, and the leaking roof, and the family 3 months behind, and she thought that Gerald, drowning in debt, would sell them all off within the year to feed the bank. And she thought of her father under the oak the tenants called the judge, settling their quarrels for free. And she decided, quietly in his chair, that she was not going to prove anything about herself at all. She was only going to keep his word. She was going to make his true wishes stand. That was the whole of it. Not I am clever. Only he asked me to. She laid the true March letter flat on the desk. She would need it. She folded it once, carefully, along its old crease, and she set it inside the monogrammed brief bag, the one with J.A. gone dull in gold, and she buckled the strap. And then she blew out the lamp. The estate could not simply be handed over on the strength of a solicitor's word. Probate had to be formalized. And because Josiah Ainsworth had been a QC of standing, and because the will touched land and tenants and a considerable sum, the matter was to be reconvened, days later, before an independent executor and a court registrar to make everything official and clean. The independent executor was a man named Sir Edmund Callow, also a Queen's Counsel. An old colleague of her father's, one of the few who still came out to the hall in the last years, a lean grey man with a dry voice and eyes that missed nothing. Gerald had allowed his presence because Sir Edmund's name gave the proceedings weight and respectability, and Gerald, arrogant to the last, could not imagine that respectability might cut the other way. He thought he had bought an easy afternoon. He had, in fact, brought a hawk into the room to watch him lie. They met again in the same front parlour, much the same faces. The 11 who had laughed. Pruitt, with his neat papers. Hollis QC, still easy, still fed, expecting once more to be paid a fortune to do nothing. Seated near Gerald, Cordelia in her black, and now Sir Edmund Callow at the head, with the registrar beside him and a book open before him, there to see the thing done honestly. Prudence came in her grey. This time she carried the brief bag, though no one made anything of it. A spinster with her father's old bag, a sentimental object, beneath notice, and this time, when there was no place for her at the table, she stood a moment, and then she took the chair by the door again without being told, and she sat, and she folded her gloved hands, and she waited. The registrar began the formalities, the codicil was described, the estate was recited. Pruitt murmured his little confirmations. It was all sliding smoothly toward its conclusion, the whole machine of it, oiled and paid for, moving Gerald's way. And Prudence sat by the door and let it come almost all the way to its end, because she had learned at that same father's knee that you speak when speaking will land, and not one moment before. And then, just as the registrar drew breath to formalize the codicil and close the matter, Prudence Ainsworth stood up. She rose from the chair by the door. And this time, mark this, because everything before now has been the story climbing to this single act, this time she did not sit back down. Cordelia turned, ready with the same sweet poison, the sit-down, dear already forming on her lips. Gerald's face began to darken. Hollis looked up with the beginnings of his contemptuous smile, but Prudence spoke first. And she did not accuse anyone. She did not raise her voice. She did not say the word forgery. She looked at Sir Edmund Callow, at the one honest man at the head of that table, and she asked him a single, calm, courteous question. She said, "Sir Edmund, before this document is made final, I would ask the court to do one small thing. I would ask you to compare the ink of the date and of the clause that favours my brother against the ink of the body of the page. That is all. Only look at the ink, not an accusation, a request, quiet as a hymn." And for the second time in that red room, the whole place went still, but it was a different stillness now. Because Sir Edmund Callow, old QC, did not laugh. He set down his pen. And he looked, very slowly, from the plain woman standing by the door to the codicil on the table in front of him, and then back to the woman. And something moved behind his sharp grey eyes. And across the table, Silas Pruitt had gone the colour of the paper in his hands. Silas Pruitt found his voice first. He always did. It was the thing he was paid for. "Sir Edmund," he said, and he tried to make it smooth, "this is, forgive me, this is exactly what one fears in these matters. Grief and a want of occupation. The lady has had a hard 3 years, no one doubts it, but she has no standing here, and no learning, and I will not have the good name of this instrument questioned by a—" He stopped. He had been going to say a word. You could see the word forming behind his teeth. Spinster, or hysteric. One of the small knives that men like Pruitt keep in their sleeves for women who forget their place. But he looked at Sir Edmund's face, and he did not say it. "By a what, Mr. Pruitt?" Sir Edmund asked. Very mild. The mildness of a man who has spent 40 years watching lesser men trip over their own cleverness. By a person, Pruitt finished, unqualified to hold an opinion on the matter. And here Gerald leaned forward. Gerald, who had sat all this while with his creditors ticking behind his eyes and his £6,000 waiting like a held breath. He could not help himself. The arrogance of the man was a physical thing, like heat off a stove. "She reads to sick men," Gerald said. "That is the whole of her education, Sir Edmund. My father, God rest him, kept her by his bed, as one keeps a comfortable chair. She fetched his broth, she turned his pages, she is a good nurse, she is not a lawyer, and this performance, then it will cost you nothing," said Prudence, to look at the ink. She had not moved from the chair by the door. She said it quietly, the way she said everything, but it went across that red room like a stone skipped over still water, and every ripple of it broke against her brother's face. Because it was unanswerable. That was the thing. If the codicil was honest, the ink would say so, and the whole matter would be closed inside of a minute, and she would be shamed for her impertinence and sent home. Gerald wanted that. You could see him wanting it. And he could not have it without letting Sir Edmund lift the page to the window, and some animal part of him, some part below his arrogance, knew what the window would show. Hollis QC saved him, or tried to. Hollis rose, and he was smiling still, but the smile had gone thin at the edges, the way a rope goes thin before it parts. He was a barrister. He knew the sound of a room turning. He had heard it in real courts, and he heard it now. "Sir Edmund," he said with respect to the bench, "for you sit as good as a bench today. A document admitted to probate is not to be unpicked by the naked eye of an interested party. There are forms, there are procedures. If the lady wishes to lodge a caveat, let her instruct counsel in the proper season, and we shall meet her properly, not here. Not in her father's parlour. This is not the place for a woman to, it is precisely the place," said Sir Edmund. And he did lift the page. He did not do it quickly. He was an old man, and he did everything at the pace of an old man, which is a kind of authority all its own, because a room must wait on it. He took the codicil in his two hands. He turned in his chair toward the tall window, where the March light— no, it was later than March now, it was the raw end of April, 3 weeks and more since Josiah went into the ground, where the pale afternoon light came in over the laurels, and he held the paper up to it. The room did not breathe. Prudence watched him and did not gloat. Understand that about her. There was no triumph in her face. There was only the same steady attention she had turned on her father's law books for 3 years by the light of the good lamp. The attention of a person who wants to get a thing right more than she wants to be seen getting it right. Her gloved hands were folded in her lap. Her chin was level. She had waited her whole life to be looked at as more than a comfortable chair, and now that the room was about to look, she did not preen. She only waited for it to see what she had already seen. Sir Edmund lowered the page. His face had changed. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "come and stand by me. Sir Edmund, I really must. Come and stand by me, sir, and bring your eyes." Pruitt came. He came like a man walking to the edge of a cliff he had built himself, and Sir Edmund held the page between them up against the grey light, and he laid one long finger, not touching the ink, hovering over it, first upon the body of the document, the aged run of the writing, and then upon the date at its head, and then upon the clause, low down. The clause that gave Gerald the hall and the farms and the whole of the residue. "Tell me," said Sir Edmund, "that you see the same thing I see." And Prudence, from her chair by the door, said it for him. Not loudly. She simply named it, the way her father had taught her to name things, plainly, so that a plain naming becomes a proof. "The body of the page is written in iron gall ink," she said. "You will know it, Sir Edmund, better than I. Iron gall darkens as it ages. It bites into the paper and it goes brown, a warm brown, the colour of old tea. My father's letters from 10 years ago are that colour. His letters from last autumn are beginning to be that colour. Look at the body of this codicil. It is that colour. It is oxidized. It is old, or made to look old." She paused. No one filled the pause. No one dared. "Now look at the date," she said. "The 14th of March. And look at the clause below, the one that names my brother. That ink has not gone brown. It is bluer, it is fresher, it sits on the surface of the paper, and it has not yet bitten down and turned. Iron gall does that in weeks, in months, not in the same hour it was laid. Those 2 lines were written at a different time from the rest of this page. Later, much later, after the body of it had already aged. Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "And that," said Prudence, "is why I asked only that the court look at the ink. Because the ink cannot be cross-examined. The ink does not care whether I am a spinster or a scholar. The ink is simply telling the truth, and it has been telling it, patiently, since the day the fraud was laid over the honest page." Cordelia found her tongue then. Cordelia, who had married into a London townhouse and had come today expecting to leave with the deed of it in her reticule. She turned in her seat, and her voice had the old contempt in it, but the contempt was cracking now, like ice over a pond in a thaw. "This is absurd. Fresh ink, old ink, who is to say? She could say anything. She could say the moon was made of paper." "Gerald, are we to sit here and let her—" "Be quiet, Cordelia," said Gerald. And that was the moment the room understood. When Gerald told his sister to be quiet, when Gerald, who had ruled every room he was ever weak enough to be given, turned on his own ally to shut her mouth, everyone in that parlour understood that Gerald was afraid. And a frightened man in a room of frightened allies is a spectacle nobody forgets. But Pruitt was not finished. A cornered clerk is the most dangerous kind, because he has spent his life inside the machinery of the law, and he knows all its little levers, and he will pull any of them to save his own neck. He drew himself up. He put on the voice he used with widows and orphans, the voice of the man who holds the pen and therefore holds the world. "Sir Edmund," he said, "let us grant, for the sake of peace, that the lady has a keen eye for colour. Let us grant it. What she has not got, what no amount of nursing and page-turning could give her, is the law. She speaks of ink as though ink were law. It is not. There is a great and technical body of doctrine that governs the impeaching of a testamentary instrument, and it is not to be plucked out of the air by a woman who has read a few novels in a sick-room. I say, and I say it plainly, and I will stake my practice on it, that if this person cannot stand and name for us the actual doctrines she pretends to wield, the actual authorities, the actual law, then her ink and her colours are the raving of a disappointed daughter. And this court should hear no more of them. It was a trap, and it was a good one. You must see that it was a good one. It was the last card of a clever, wicked man, and it was well played. Because Pruitt was certain the way only an arrogant man is certain, that she could not do it, that she would open her mouth and out would come nothing, or worse. Out would come broken scraps half-remembered, and the room would laugh again, and the laughter would drown the ink, and drown the date, and drown everything, and the codicil would slide through into probate on a tide of a spinster's humiliation. He wanted her examined. He demanded she be examined. Sir Edmund Callow looked at Prudence, and there was something almost gentle in the old man's face, because I think he already half guessed, and he was giving her the floor the way you give a violin to someone you suspect can play. "The request is not improper," Sir Edmund said slowly. "Mr. Pruitt asks the court to be satisfied that the objection is made on understanding and not on grief. Miss Ainsworth, you have raised a challenge to this instrument. Are you willing to answer for the ground of it?" "In law?" The registrar had his pen up. Gerald was smirking again. The fear had ebbed for a moment and left the old arrogance standing in the shallows, because surely, this was the end of her. Hollis had sat back down and folded his arms. Cordelia dabbed her lip and waited to enjoy it, and there was a moment, one moment, where the whole thing hung, because this was the blind spot her father had feared in her, the one he had named to Sir Edmund in a letter 2 winters gone. That she had spent her life being small to keep the peace. That she might, this one last time, decide it was not worth the trouble. Stay quiet, take the annuity and the books, go home and mark the margins in a house that was no longer hers, and let the wicked keep the hall, because rising was frightening and silence was warm. She thought about her father, not the frail man of the last months, the one whose spoon she had guided to his mouth on the 14th of March, a Friday, 3 days before he died, and she had fed him with her own hand because his own could not close on the handle. She thought about the man before that, the Queen's counsel of 40 years, the man who had sat her by the good lamp of an evening and made her read Blackstone aloud until the words stopped being strange, who had said again and again, until it was worn into her like a groove in a step, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, false in one thing, false in all. If a witness lies to you once, you may disbelieve him in everything. If a document lies to you in one line, you may distrust the whole of it. She stood up straighter. And she answered Pruitt. She did not raise her voice. She never once in that whole long afternoon raised her voice. That was the terror of her if you were on the wrong side of it. She spoke in the level, unhurried tone of a woman reading a recipe. You ask me to name the doctrine, she said. Very well. I will name several, and you will tell me if I am parroting. The first is the law's oldest suspicion of a codicil that mends a will to the sudden advantage of one child over the others, made when the testator is known to be failing, produced only after his death, and witnessed by those who profit or those they employ. The courts do not forbid such a codicil, but they watch it. They call it, in the books, an instrument attended by suspicious circumstances, and where suspicion attaches, the burden shifts. It is not for me to prove this codicil false. It is for the party who propounds it, that is you, Mr. Pruitt, and my brother behind you, to prove it true, to satisfy the conscience of the court that my father knew this document, and approved this document, and executed this document, in his right mind and by his own hand. That is the law. You may check it against Barry and Butlin if the name is not too technical for a sick-room nurse to have read by lamplight. Pruitt's face had begun to do something complicated. The second, she went on, is the rule my father taught me before I was 15, and it is the rule that undoes you. A genuine signature is careless. A man who has signed his own name 10,000 times signs it without looking, the way he breathes. His hand knows the road. It hurries. It smudges. It leaves the flourish half made because the pen is already moving to the next thing. But a forged signature is careful. The forger draws it. He watches every stroke. He is anxious to get it right, and in his anxiety he gets it too right. He overcorrects. He makes the letters cleaner and firmer and more perfect than the living man ever troubled to make them. My father said, "Show me a signature too good to be true, and I will show you a forgery," because the truth was never that tidy. Now look at my father's name on this page. Her voice did not shake. It is beautiful. It is firm. Every letter of it is complete. The J and the A are drawn like copperplate. And I tell you before all of you who knew him, by the 14th of March, my father could not close his hand upon a spoon. I know because I held the spoon. His signature in that last fortnight, when he could sign at all, was a stagger and a tremble. A poor broken crawl across the page that broke my heart to watch. It was not this. This firm, perfect, unhurried name was never made by the ruined hand I fed. It was made by a steady hand that had all the time in the world and every reason to be careful. It was overcorrected. It is too good, and a signature too good to be true is a forgery, said Sir Edmund Callow, very quietly, finishing it for her, because he had heard Josiah Ainsworth say those exact words across a table at Lincoln's Inn 30 years before, and the room heard the old QC say it. And that changed everything. But Prudence was not done. Because she had a third thing, and the third thing was not law. The third thing was proof, and she had carried it into that room, buckled inside her father's own monogrammed brief bag, the bag with J.A. Worked into the leather, the bag that had hung on the hook by his study desk for 40 years, the bag she had taken down and carried under her arm past all their sneering faces, without one of them thinking to wonder why the nurse had brought a lawyer's bag to a parlour. She unbuckled it now. Her hands were steady. On the 17th of February, she said, and again in the first week of March, my father wrote letters. He wrote them slowly and in pain, and he made me witness that they were his own. Because he was a careful man, and he knew his hand was failing, and he wished there to be no doubt. I kept them. I kept everything of his. I have one here. She drew it out. A single sheet. The paper soft with handling, the ink upon it a poor broken crawl. A stagger, a tremble, the letters half made, and wandering off their line, the signature at the foot of it barely a signature at all, a wounded thing, a true thing. This is my father's hand in March, she said. The real one, the dying one. Set it beside the codicil, set the true tremor beside the perfect flourish. And then tell me, Mist. Pruitt, tell all of us. Which of these two was written by a man who could not hold a spoon? She held the two papers out. And Sir Edmund took them, one in each hand, and he laid them side by side on the table before the 11 witnesses, in the raw April light, and there was no need for him to say a word, because the papers said it. The broken true one. The perfect false one. Anyone in the room could see it. The maid Alice, standing by the door, put her hand to her mouth. Mr. Vane, Cordelia's husband, leaned forward and went very still. 11 people who had laughed at a plain woman 3 weeks before now looked at 2 pieces of paper and understood, all at once and without a single one of them speaking, exactly what had been done in that house, and by whom. The silence was enormous, and into that silence Sir Edmund Callow rose. He rose to his full height, which was not great, but the room came up with him, the way a room does for a man it has decided to believe. He set his hands flat on the table. He looked, for a moment, not at the guilty, but at Prudence, a long look, the look one professional gives another across a great distance of years, and then he addressed them all. I have sat here, he said, as an old man does a favour for a dead friend, expecting to lend my name to the reading of his last wishes and go home to my dinner. I did not expect to be taught my own trade at Josiah Ainsworth's parlour table by his middle daughter. But I have been. And so, before this matter goes 1 inch further, there are 2 things this room does not know, and it is going to know them now. He drew a folded letter from his own coat, old paper, a stronger hand than the March letter, but the same hand from a healthier season. The first. 2 winters ago, the winter of 71, Josiah wrote to me. We wrote often. We were the last 2 left of our year at the inn. And in that letter he told me, I have it here, I will read you the line, he wrote that his daughter Prudence had, and I quote him, read more law at my elbow than half my juniors ever did at Lincoln's Inn, and that it was the private grief of his life that the bar would never have her, for the accident of her sex, when she had the truest lawyer's mind he had ever made. Those are his words. Not mine, not hers. His, the man you have spent this afternoon pretending believed his daughter fit only to improve her reading, that man told me, in his own hand, that she was the best legal mind under his roof, and that the world's loss was greater than hers. Cordelia made a small sound. Nobody looked at her. The second thing, said Sir Edmund, and now his voice went hard as a magistrate's, is this. Josiah Ainsworth did not die intestate, but for a codicil found in a drawer. Josiah Ainsworth made a will, a true will, a whole and proper will, drawn and signed and witnessed last autumn, when his mind was clear and his hand, though slow, was still his own. And he did not leave it with Mr. Pruitt, he lodged it with me. Sealed in my strong-box in Bath, where it has sat these many months, because, and I understand it only now, God forgive me for being slow, because he did not trust the firm of Pruitt and Marchbank with it. He suspected what his son and his son's solicitor might do when he was gone, and he built against it, quietly, the way that careful man built against everything. And in that true will, I read it again this morning on the road here, for I confess this good woman's first request 3 days ago set a worm of doubt in me, in that true will he leaves the Hall, and the farms, and the residue of the estate, not to Gerald, and not chopped up for London houses, but to his daughter Prudence, in trust, for the tenants, to keep the roof over the people he loved. Exactly, in every particular, as she has spent this afternoon trying to defend without even knowing the document existed. That is the thing. Mark it. She had not known. She had fought for her father's honest wishes, not because she knew there was a true will hidden in Bath that made her the heir. She thought she was fighting for an annuity and a shelf of books. She fought because it was true, and because he had taught her that you defend the truth whether or not it pays you. And it turned out the truth had already, months before, made her rich. The forged codicil, you see, had been built for one reason above all others. It had been built to bury a true will. Pruitt knew the real will existed, or feared it did, and could not find it, and so had manufactured a later one, dated the 14th of March, to override anything Josiah might have signed the autumn before. The whole fraud existed to defeat exactly the daughter clever enough to unravel it, and she had unravelled it. And now the true will walked out of Sir Edmund's strong-box and cut the forgery's throat. Then the room turned, and the reckoning came, and it came to each of them by name. Gerald first. Gerald had gone the colour of tallow. He was doing sums behind his eyes, and they were terrible sums, because he had gambled everything on this, the £6,000 owed to the Nettlebridge and County Bank, the foreclosure notice already dated, the certainty that the Hall would pass to him whole, and he would sell the farms out from under the tenants, and clear his debts, and walk away a gentleman. All of it was gone in the space of 10 minutes. Worse than gone. Because it is one thing to be a debtor, it is another to have forged your dead father's hand to rob your sister, in a room of 11 witnesses, with a Queen's Counsel naming the crime aloud. Edmund, he said. Sir Edmund. There has been, this is a misunderstanding, Pruitt drew the thing I trusted my solicitor, that is all. A man trusts his solicitor. You will want to say a great deal less than that, said Sir Edmund, and you will want to say it to counsel. Not to me. And not, God help you, to your sister, who fed you the truth across the supper table 3 weeks ago, the spoon Gerald. She told you your father could not hold a spoon on the day this thing was dated, and you told her to be silent, and who has just declined to laugh at you, which is more mercy than you extended to her. Gerald had no words. For the first time in 38 years, Gerald Ainsworth had no words. The bank would have him now. Not the Hall, him, the furniture of his lodgings, the coat off his back, and no brother's estate to hide behind, and a charge of forgery waiting at the assizes besides. He sat down. He sat down the way a building comes down. Cordelia next. Cordelia had built her whole afternoon on one sentence, and the sentence came back to her, not spoken by anyone. That was the cruelty of it and the justice of it together. Nobody in that room quoted her words back at her. Nobody needed to. Sit down, dear. This is men's work. She had patted her sister's hand and said it in front of them all 3 weeks past. And now it simply hung in the air of the parlour of its own accord, and everyone heard it, and everyone measured it against the woman standing by the door who had just out-lawyered a Queen's Counsel, and Cordelia's face crumpled under the weight of a thing no one had to say. She got a smaller portion in the true will. a modest legacy, not the London house. Her husband, Mr. Vane, was looking at his wife as though seeing her freshly, and not kindly, and that look would go home with them in the carriage, and it would stay in the house a long time. Then Pruitt. And Sir Edmund did not raise his voice for Pruitt either. He did something worse. He spoke to him the way a judge speaks to a solicitor he is about to end. Mr. Pruitt, you are an officer of the court. You drew a false testamentary instrument, or you propounded one knowing it false, and I am not yet certain which, though I mean to be. A forged will is not a matter for a family parlour. It is a felony, and it is tried at the assizes, and it is attended upon conviction by penalties I need not list to a man of your training. Your partner, Mr. Marchbank, will hear of this from me before nightfall. Your firm will not survive it, and you will spend what remains of your professional life explaining to men in wigs why the ink on a codicil you certified was younger than the paper beneath it. I would advise you to say nothing further today. You have already said far too much, and every syllable of it. This good woman could take a part with her eyes shut. Pruitt sat. His hands, which had held the codicil so smugly an hour before, lay open and empty on the table, like a man who has dropped something he will never pick up again. And Hollis Q.C., the laughing man, the man who had looked at a plain woman's lips moving over the Latin and delivered the line the lady mistakes a parlour for a lending library, the man 11 people had laughed along with, Hollis gathered his papers very quietly and did not look at anyone. He had taken an easy afternoon for an easy fee, and contempt had made him careless, and now he wanted only to be gone before his name got any further into the thing. As he passed the chair by the door he stopped. He was a barrister, and a barrister knows craft when he is beaten by it, and to his small credit he did the one honest thing left to him. He inclined his head to her. "Madam," he said, "I was wrong about the lending library." "You were," said Prudence, "but you read the Latin correctly. It was the woman you misread." Sir Edmund Callow sat back down and drew the true will to him and laid his hand flat upon it, and he looked around that red room at the wreck of the family Josiah Ainsworth had left behind, and then he looked at the daughter, still standing, still level, still holding her father's poor March letter as gently as if it were his hand itself. "Miss Ainsworth," he said, "the court is satisfied, more than satisfied. Will you sit? Not by the door. Here, at the table. Where you should have been seated at the first, and where, had this room had the wit your father credited you with, you would have been seated all along." And Prudence Ainsworth crossed the parlour, past her white-faced brother and her crumpled sister, and the ruined solicitor and the silent barrister, and she sat down at the head of her father's table, in her mourning grey, with his brief bag beside her, and his true words in her hand, and she did not weep, and she did not gloat. And she folded her gloved hands upon the wood the way she had folded them by the door an hour before. The plain sister, the comfortable chair, the nurse who turned the pages, she had held the only key in the room the whole time. And now, at last, the room could see it. 6 months on, there is a study at Ashcroft Hall, where the late honey light comes in through the tall windows of an early autumn evening, the kind of light Josiah loved, gold and slow, laying itself along the spines of the law books on the long wall. The good lamp stands where it always stood. The monogrammed brief bag hangs on its hook by the desk, worn and familiar. Only now it goes out with its owner to the quarter sessions in Nettlebridge, where a woman may not stand at the bar, but may most certainly be consulted, quietly, by every attorney in the county who has learned better than to underestimate the mind at Ashcroft. The tenant ledgers are open on the desk. Every farm still stands in its family's name. The rents are fair, and the roofs are sound, because the trust her father built holds them safe, and the trustee reads every account herself by the light of the good lamp, and marks the margins in her own hand now. Her own hand, not an imitation of his, though the maid Alice says the two are growing hard to tell apart. Gerald writes sometimes, from lodgings in Bristol he can barely keep. The assizes were merciful in the end. The true will's recovery spared him the worst, and Pruitt carried the weight of the forgery to prison, as the man who drew it. But Gerald is poor now. Honestly poor, which is the one lesson he never wished to learn. He writes, asking after family feeling. Prudence sends him, 4 times a year, the annuity that the true will, her father's true will, the merciful one, allowed him, not a penny more, and no letter with it. The money is the whole of the answer, and the silence around it is the rest. Cordelia does not write. Sir Edmund Callow comes to dinner when the roads are dry. He is very old now. He calls her, to the other grey heads of the county, the best read mind at Ashcroft, and the quietest, and then he adds, always, that these are the same thing, and that if the two of them had been born in a fairer century, she would have taken silk before he did. There is a woman they seated by the door. They handed her a chair as though she were staff, and they laughed when her lips moved over the Latin, and 11 people laughed with them. And she folded her gloved hands, and she watched the ink, and she waited until speaking would land, because her father had taught her that, at his knee, by the good lamp, in a house that is hers now. She held the only key in the room. She had held it all along. If you have ever been the quiet one at the table, the one they seated by the door, I think you already knew how this ended. Tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.